Gratitude, huh? Thick drops of black coffee hit the marble floor like blood soaking through a wedding dress, slow, steady, merciless. The air in Aura Coffee was thick with the scent of synthetic vanilla scorched almond milk and a nameless tension rising from the bar. No one said a word. A customer stayed frozen mid-sip foam, trembling on her cappuccino, like it couldn't believe what she just heard. A brand-new barista in the corner dropped a stirring spoon. The metallic clang echoed like a gunshot inside a chapel. Only she stood tall, unblinking, her voice sliced through the air like a razor gliding across bare skin. We sweat and bleed to keep this place running. Maya Torres said, her eyes blazing like twin torches. While you complain, your $8 latte doesn't have enough foam. The man in the suit didn't move, but his face had turned a dark, ugly red. Gratitude, she repeated each syllable, a nail hammered into the silence. The woman I loved died for what you call gratitude. Do you even know what it looks like? It's not flowers, it's not tips. It's night shifts, it's blistered feet, it's slashed hours, and cheap cold medicine because you don't qualify for insurance. In the corner, a young man discreetly lifted his phone to record. Across the bar, the man wearing the Jules apron stood, frozen knuckles white from the grip on his towel. A bead of sweat rolled slowly down his temple, not from heat, but from shame. He wasn't Jules. He was Julian Croft, CEO of Aura Coffee Co. And this moment, this very breathless moment in which all of Aura Coffee stood still, would erupt into a social media earthquake. 24 hours earlier, a faint click snapped in the air. Julian flinched. Not a gunshot. Just the strap of a cheap nylon apron tightening around his neck. The employee break room reeked of lemon-scented bleach and burnt coffee. The walls were patchy white, and the busted coffee maker wheezed like a smoker on his final breath. There was no walnut desk, no smart thermostat, only heat stench and indignity. Julian, in the role of Jules, bent down to slip on his rented non-slip shoes, $17 a week. His feet missed the soft luxury of Italian leather. Now every step felt like walking on a self-destruct order. Julian Croft doesn't exist, he muttered. There's only Jules, a trainee. Nobody knows who I am. He inhaled, then choked on a wave of ammonia and spoiled milk, and stepped out. The back kitchen felt like the belly of a mechanical beast, hot, cramped, loud, and constantly churning. Tray in one hand, his other fumbled with labels like an idiot lost on a factory floor. Don't overlap the stickers, a woman's voice cut from behind. Julian turned. The woman had tired eyes, but they were sharp as blades. She handed him a fresh stack of labels. Redo that mess, and... For God's sake, don't get in Maya's way. Sorry. Maya, she's the only reason this place hasn't collapsed, Eliza whispered. She doesn't break the rules. She is the rules. With that, Eliza turned away, leaving Julian in the middle of chaos, with a name hanging over him like a warning. He didn't have to wait long. A loud crash rang out as Julian knocked over a full jug of oat milk. It spilled across the floor like thin, sticky blood, reeking immediately. Someone stopped breathing. An employee hissed under their breath. Maya appeared. No shouting, no cursing. She just stood there like a cold blade in midsummer. Her gaze flicked to the mess, then landed on him, not with disgust, not with pity. Just assessment. Clean it, she said, voice soft as air but heavy as Saturn's gravity. And next time work like someone's rent depends on it. Then she turned her back. No extra words. No hesitation. Just Julian left alone, hand trembling on the mop handle as a new awareness slipped into his spine for the first time. This wasn't a job. It was a battlefield. And he had no idea what he was fighting for. He thought he was undercover. But maybe he was the only one who hadn't realized that Aura Coffee was not the kind of place where anything could stay hidden, especially not naivety. That morning, Julian huddled in a corner of the break room, trying to label a new box of caramel syrup. His hands trembled not from cold, but because the night before he had dreamt of his own toes, blistered and burning inside those cheap, non-slip shoes. He'd woken up with the smell of bleach still trapped in his nostrils. The door swung open. Maya walked in. She didn't look at him, didn't need to. She pulled open a drawer, grabbed a small box, and left. The air went completely still, as if the entire room held its breath. Julian started watching Maya, at first out of curiosity, then because he simply couldn't stop. One afternoon, he saw Maya slip a folded $20 bill into Eliza's apron pocket, then turn away without a word. "I'll pay you back," Eliza stammered. "Don't," Maya replied curtly. "Buy medicine for the kid." Another day, he saw her crouched beside Leo, the clumsy art student with messy hair and worry in his eyes. The cold brew machine was malfunctioning, and Leo was about to be written up by Trevor. Maya popped the lid, nudged a hose, and flipped a switch. "Don't let it sound like it's about to explode," she said, eyes fixed on her hands. "Trevor hears that noise and you're done." Leo nodded like a bobblehead. Julian, standing in the shadows, suddenly felt small. That afternoon, Trevor Vance showed up. Ill-fitting gray suit, crooked blue tie, a polished face with cheap charm eyes hidden behind politeness, like sunglasses in disguise. A tablet in hand, not to place an order, but to pull data. "We need to optimize service speed. Anything over 7 minutes is unacceptable. Pre-notification isn't required for overtime cuts if KPI reports fall short. There are no exceptions to the insurance policy." His voice droned on like a pre-programmed algorithm. Julian listened to every word, a copy-paste of phrases he himself had once spoken in old board meetings. Only this time they were being wielded like knives. And then it happened. Eliza received a system notification 2 hours from her last week's shift had been automatically removed. She no longer met the minimum required hours to keep her health insurance. Her little girl was coughing, feverish, needed to see a doctor. Now, no insurance, no money. Eliza didn't cry. She simply sat down, gripping the edge of her shirt fingernails, digging into her palms until they turned white. Julian saw it all, and for the first time, a new equation formed in his mind. $30. The price of 2 cut hours. The line between a child getting medical care and not getting medical care. Night fell. Aura Coffee closed, but not everyone went home. Julian heard something from the storage room, not loud but tight like a stretched wire. He crept toward it, hiding behind a shelf. Trevor and Maya. "Who do you think you are interfering with the system?" Trevor snapped, pointing at his tablet. "You and I both know that glitch wasn't an accident." Maya replied, her voice colder than the rusty air conditioner beside her. "Don't assign motives to a piece of software," he scoffed. "Software is a tool. People design it, then prove it." Trevor stepped back, folded his arms, gaze taunting. "Prove I deliberately cut hours from some poor Eliza." Maya said nothing. Not because she had no answer, because she was waiting. Julian, hidden in the shadows, gripped his phone tighter. He had started recording from the very first sentence. After Trevor left, Julian stayed. He watched Maya exit the room. No outburst. No tears. But when the last light flicked off and everyone else had gone, he saw her pause beside the rattling air conditioner. She leaned her forehead lightly against the wall. Her breaths were heavy. Her chest was rising and falling, eyes closed tight. No tears. but something heavier than tears, the weight of everything she had seen and could no longer ignore. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He sat on the bed, or rather the thin mattress, in a short-term rental. The notebook he had brought to log his field CEO program now looked different. First page, employee experience statistics. Page 12, desperation. Page 17, Trevor voice data eyes. And scribbled in the margin, I'm no longer tracking their performance. I'm recording their pain. The cafe was eerily quiet after closing hours. Soft amber lights spilled onto the high stools lined up like ritual altars. A table in the corner was covered in dark cloth. No one had sat there since Isabel left. Julian didn't know that name, but he began to hear it, quietly like a whisper carried by the wind. You're the only one who's been here more than a year, right? He asked as Clara carefully wiped down the croissant tray, though the cafe had been empty for a while. She paused, didn't look at him. But her fingers froze on a dried smear of butter. Not something to be proud of, she said, voice thin as oil-stained paper. Good people don't last long here. He sat beside her, feeling the cold vinyl press through his pants. Who was Isabel? She wasn't surprised, just lifted her eyes toward the space above the bar, as if seeing someone he couldn't. Her voice broke like a glass dropped on tile, was like morning sunlight. Warm, pure, and too brief. Isabel had been the youngest employee at the flagship store. A girl with wild curls that never had time to be brushed, but always smiled brightly when pouring coffee. She started her morning shift at 5:30, ended her laundry job at 2 a.m. Why? Because the company system, an earlier version of the current software, had quietly slashed her hours without notice. Automatically. Silently. No one is held accountable. She needed rent and medicine for her asthmatic brother. So she took on a night job, slept 3 hours a day. Until that fateful morning, Isabel fell asleep at the wheel. The accident happened not 5 blocks from the cafe. She didn't die from exhaustion, Clara said, eyes now filled with tears. She died because the system saw humans as a cost. Julian said nothing. His throat tightened not from shock, but from familiarity. Too familiar with boardroom talks about workforce cost reduction like trimming hedges. Too familiar with green performance charts. Never once asking who was bleeding behind those numbers, the company sent a condolence card. Clara said, her voice now hollow. A week later, they installed a $15,000 espresso machine, placed exactly where Isabel used to stand. Julian's stomach twisted. Not from the coffee, but from a realization burning his mind like fire on skin. He was the one who had signed off on that purchase. He didn't know when he had left the break room. He saw Maya standing at the far end of the counter, quietly wiping down the grinder. She hadn't noticed him, and in that moment, bathed in faint light, her tired cheekbones shadowed. Julian saw Maya's face soften, no longer a firewall, but a wound. She secretly pulled a small, faded photo from her wallet. Isabel and Maya. 2 girls laughing like children. She gently stroked Isabel's face, then quickly put it away, as if afraid to be caught feeling. Julian backed away, hiding behind a supply rack, and he began to tremble. Not from the cold, but because he had built a world where people had to hide even their love. An hour later, alone in his short-term rental, Julian opened his now frayed notebook and wrote a single line. I thought I was studying the system. But what I've walked into is a graveyard. And when his eyes finally closed from exhaustion, the last image he saw wasn't Trevor or data or machines. It was Maya alone in the empty cafe. A small figure holding onto a memory the system had tried to erase. The next morning, when a customer in a suit blurted out, "You should be grateful to work here," Maya turned. Her face was dry. Her voice was steady. But Julian behind the counter, wearing an apron that said Jules, knew this was no longer a protest. It was a eulogy. For Isabel. For every invisible soul. Gratitude. Maya enunciated every word. My friend died for what you call gratitude. She was so grateful she worked herself to death. While people like you counted every tip, silence fell over Aura Coffee like a tombstone. Julian was no longer a CEO, no longer Jules. He was a witness, and the only thing he could do was not look away. 12 hours after the explosion, the video spread like wildfire through a dry forest. On TikTok, a caption pinned across millions of views read, "Employee yells in the customer's face. CEO stands frozen. The ending nobody expected. Hashtag #Aura awakens. Hashtag #Justice for Isabel. Hashtag #Chuktunhu's gratitude." That morning, no one spoke inside the cafe. Every blender buzz, every footstep echoed louder than usual. Julian stood in the corner of the counter, his apron soaked with stale milk and an irreversible truth. Trevor walked in. Crisply pressed suit. Smile thin as foil. He didn't hold his gaze on anyone longer than a second, his eyes scanning like a man inspecting damaged inventory. "All right." His voice cut through the heavy silence. "We need to restore customer trust as soon as possible." He turned to Maya, tossing her a look laced with arrogance. "And to do that, Maya Torres, you're officially terminated." Silence. No one spoke. No one screamed. No one slammed fists on counters. Only action. Eliza stepped forward, removed her apron, folded it, placed it gently on the counter. She said nothing. She only looked at Maya, and in that look said everything. "If you leave, I leave too." Leo followed, then Clara, and then one by one, like dominoes falling not from pressure but from principle. A row of aprons stretched across the counter. Quiet. Solemn like a memorial. Maya stood still, unmoving, the last pillar in a crumbling world. "You're all insane?" Trevor shouted, voice cracking. "She humiliated the company. She broke policy. This is unacceptable behavior." His words wailed through the room like a midnight ambulance, frantic, out of place, and utterly ineffective. Then another voice rang out, deep, steady, and terrifyingly calm. "No, Trevor. What's unacceptable is that this company allowed it to happen." Everyone turned. Julian took off his hat, took off his glasses, removed the disguise he'd worn for the past week. He stood upright, unhidden, unflinching. "My name is Julian Croft. I'm the founder and CEO of Aura Coffee Co." The silence after that sentence was the sound of an entire world collapsing in the minds of his employees. Maya didn't blink. Eliza covered her mouth. Trevor stepped back, as if he'd seen a ghost. In the past week, Julian said, his voice firm but never raised, "I've lived among you. I've witnessed the truth, recorded it, written it down, and now I'm going to reveal it." He pulled out a small notebook and a USB drive. The algorithm didn't randomly cut hours. It targeted the most vulnerable. Trevor Vance didn't just know about it, he exploited it. He turned toward Trevor, whose face had now gone ghost white. "You're not being fired for poor management. You're being fired for enabling a dehumanizing system. And you are now officially under civil investigation for the harm caused to employees, particularly for the death of Isabel Torres." Her name was spoken finally as a human being, not a line item in a report. Trevor opened his mouth to protest, but Julian raised a hand. "You don't get to speak. I have the recordings, I have witnesses, and I have a conscience." Julian turned to Maya. "You're not fired. In fact, I owe you an apology and an invitation." The cafe held its breath. "I'm establishing a new department, Office of Employee Equity. It will be funded entirely from my personal assets and will have veto power over any policy that harms workers' lives. He extended a hand. Maya Torres. I want you to lead it. Maya didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment, then quietly said, "There's something you need to know before you decide. I once took money from the till." The air thickened. Not for myself, she continued, eyes unwavering, but to start a secret fund. I called it the Isabel Fund, to help those whose hours were cut but still had kids, or needed medicine, or simply needed to survive. She laid it all down. No hiding, no plea for forgiveness, just the truth. Julian was silent. Then slowly he nodded. You've been doing my job. Before I even realized it needed to be done. Let's make it official together. He extended his hand again. This time Maya took it. Not a handshake between boss and employee, but a pact between two people who once stood on opposite ends of a system, now choosing to rebuild it together. The first day after the storm. No one talked about the video anymore. They didn't need to. Trevor Vance had been locked out of the system at midnight. His employee badge was deactivated. But what was left of Aura Coffee wasn't just a person. It was an entirely different way of thinking. The changes started quietly, but they weren't invisible. The internal inbox lit up. Schedules are no longer being cut without notice. Insurance now starts at 15 hours a week instead of 20. Everyone received a mini notebook where you say what no one dares to. They called it the Isabel Journal. 3 weeks later, a company-wide email was sent from the CEO. Subject line, "We can't go back." And we shouldn't. In it, Julian officially announced complete cancellation of the scheduling algorithm, implementation of a livable wage at all locations, establishment of the Office of Employee Equity, led by Maya Torres, independent from the executive branch. 5% of annual net profit is dedicated to the Isabel Torres Memorial Fund. No one clapped. They just sat, then started working, with something new in the air. 1 year later, the flagship store no longer looked the same. It was still beautiful walnut wood walls, warm lights, $8 lattes. But now laughter wasn't a rare sound. Leo, the art student, was hanging up his paintings on the wall. One of them showed Isabel holding a tray, her smile like sunlight cutting through the scent of coffee. In the bottom corner, a handwritten line, "We remember you. We're doing better." Eliza was making coffee. Her daughter Ava was coloring at the corner table wearing fox-shaped sunglasses. Pinned to Eliza's shirt was a small badge. "I graduated from the accounting class last month." Clara was still the first to arrive. Only now she trained the new hires, no longer wiping machines in silence. Near the counter, a new bronze plaque had been mounted. It read, "The Isabel Torres Memorial Fund for Worker Dignity." Below it, a quote from Maya: "A job shouldn't require someone to die just to be seen." At another location, Maya stood in a conference room. Bright lights, large screen, charts and numbers are glowing. An executive suggested cutting a benefit to increase efficiency. Maya looked at him, not angry, but unwilling to let it slide. "The cost of turnover is higher than the cost of retention," she said. She displayed the data. "And happy employees serve customers better. We no longer trade people for profit." The room fell silent. Then Julian, seated beside her, nodded. "She's right." Discussion closed. At day's end, Julian and Maya stood before the flagship store's glass windows. Inside, warm lights glowed, customers laughed, employees served without fear. In the corner stood the old table where Isabel once worked. No one spoke. Until Maya softly smiled, her voice barely a breath. "For years, I just wished someone would listen. But turns out, what we needed was someone willing to look." Julian followed her gaze, not as a CEO looking at a staff member, but as a human seeing another. A look of gratitude, not the kind of employee gratitude expected, but the kind of gratitude a man carries when he knows he was wrong. Aura Coffee didn't become a paradise, but it learned how to say sorry, and it started rebuilding from the ones who had once been invisible. The takeaway: a system only changes when the people who built it are willing to hear those it has crushed. And justice isn't eloquent words online, it's the concrete choices made in every shift, every break, every human being. If you believe stories like this need to be told more often, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Toch Story. Because maybe you've been Maya, or Julian, or Isabel. And every story, no matter how painful, deserves to be seen.